welcome everyone. And Vanessa is here from MedRhythms in the US, where they are doing some great work on music and stroke rehabilitation. And that's what they're going to talk about. And we will take it further from here. So over to you, Vanessa and Shailaja. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa Moran. Just a little bit of background on me. I am a board-certified music therapist, and I've done an advanced training in neurologic music therapy as well. I work full-time as a neurologic music therapist. Part of my week is kind of treating through telehealth, and the other half is within an inpatient rehabilitation facility that's located in New York. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly and my presentation. Okay, so I am from the company MedRhythms. We have kind of two main hubs. Our clinical practice is located in Boston, Massachusetts, and then our digital therapeutics, side is located in Portland, Maine. So I'm going to talk about the use of music for brain health, specifically neurologic music therapy, and what we do. So who we are, I kind of briefly talked about this. So we have our clinical side, which I'm a part of. We have two hospitals or facilities that we're currently kind of working at. So we're in the Spalding Rehabilitation Network in Boston, Massachusetts, as well as now starting up, we've just recently started a program at Burke Rehabilitation Hospital, which I practice at. So we have had over 30,000 hours of direct patient care delivered to this date. We offer services throughout the rehabilitation spectrum. So inpatient, outpatient, and in-home, we really care about that continuation of care. And we treat a variety of domains, which I'll talk about later, but they're sociomotor, speech and language, and cognition. Our digital team is located in Portland, Maine. So it's a team full of engineers and business professionals working on digitizing our NMT interventions so we can really meet the demand. And we all very strongly believe in the power of music and how much it can affect others in a positive way. So we just want to be able to reach as many people as possible since there's not enough NMTs out there. So we currently have clinical trials going on. We have done a feasibility study, which I'll talk about as well for our digital product. So one of the things I always like to say is we can kind of all agree that music has power. It can uplift our mood. I'm always like to take like a show of hands of how many people like to walk or work out to music. I'm a shower singer myself. It's just something that is a part of culture and has a lot of power in how we feel and how we kind of can move along in our day. I always like to ask if anyone uses music in a fun way that they'd be willing to share.
Yeah, I would like to share. I have been learning, Carnatic music, which is usually in India. So it helps us in mathematics a lot. There's something called talam, which we put, and it really enhances the way we think, calculations and all. I always train my kids also in music so that they concentrate better. I can see there's a lot of difference when they learn music, they concentrate better. That relaxation is also there within studies.
Mm-hmm.
But while studying music itself, there's a relaxation, it's not burdening you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's like because it's something that's like a social skill, it's not like I have to study this because someone's telling me to study it. It can be really like a fun thing to learn. And that's a great kind of segue into what I'm going to talk about next, which is why music therapy and why neurologic music therapy. So music therapy as like a field has always been a social science, so kind of focusing on the psychology of music. But neurologic music therapy has looked at some of these studies in music cognition and is really applying what we know to make big changes within the brain. So this is just a nice slide to show like since, at least in the United States, since like the 1700s, we've always thought that music was part of the brain, and it's always been studied and linked with cognition. But it wasn't until the 90s with fMRI imaging that we were able to see the actual difference between when we interact with music and how the brain activates. So what makes music therapy and neurologic music therapy work? The first thing is widespread activation. So music is the only stimulus that we know of that can activate both the right and left hemisphere of the brain. So being able to have this widespread activation when participating in music allows us to access parts of the brain during rehabilitation to make functional gains. So we're kind of able to recruit from other parts of the brain that might not be injured to get that function back. The other thing that other mechanism of action we're looking at is neuroplasticity. So for anyone who might not know, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change based off of life experiences, training, and just like what you do. So, maybe if you've participated in sports a lot, you have better hand-eye coordination. I have terrible hand-eye coordination because I never did sports. I've been a musician all my life. But what we found in musicians' brains, right, is that in musician brains, we find certain areas have more neural connections. We find that the musician brains are structured very differently than non-musician brains, and that there's denser neural connections in certain parts. So like in, fine motor skills and in the auditory cortex. So being able to look at, okay, if we train with music, we're able to make real functional change using widespread activation, as well as structurally change the brain through neuroplasticity. And that's really the basis of neurologic music therapy. So before I move on to some of the other things, that was like a big kind of high level neuroscience. Any questions about that?
I have maybe I'll come in later, but just maybe it's the right time to suppose I am not interested in music per se. I mean, I was an athlete. I had no interest in music earlier, but now post-stroke, they will this therapy be of interest to me? Will it motivate me, or will it help me? What does your experience say?
So I think a lot of the times we think like, oh, once you're not a kid anymore, like you're set in stone, like your brain doesn't change, but that's not true at all. So even if I work with a lot of people that have had no music experience, similar, where they've, have been like an athlete, or they've been interested in other things their whole life. And maybe they enjoy listening to music, but they never were like in lessons or anything. It's very easy to still like use music for this functional like change within the brain. You don't need to be a musician. I work with a lot of people that are not musicians. There's not like a threshold to entry. We're able to, and as a clinician, like we're able to change things and make interventions a little bit easier for people that don't understand like the basis of music. It's not your job to know, it's my job to know. Especially for some of these later interventions where it's really just about listening and your body kind of syncs up itself, which is what I'll talk about next. Great segue. I hope I answered your question as well.
Yes, you did. You did. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to talk about entrainment and rhythm. So rhythm is like one of the basics of all of our interventions, especially when it comes to like motor planning. So entrainment is how our brains perceive beat. So beat, you can kind of think of it as either like a set point in a pattern, or you can think of it as the space between 2 points in a pattern. So I'm going to pull up a metronome. I just have one on my phone. And let me know, can you guys hear this? It's just a small click.
Yes, we can. I can. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
we can hear. Yes.
Great. So a beat is, you can either think of it as the click between each, or you can think of it as the space between. Our brains are really good at recognizing patterns. That's kind of how it makes most of its decisions. So we can recognize this pattern and anticipate the next beat, and our brain, whether we realize it or not, can synchronize to that beat. So you see this a lot in babies if they're like dancing to music for the first time and how they like move their bodies. It's usually on beat, even though they might not, we don't recognize it. So we can apply this entrainment to our motor planning, specifically walking. So this is our 3 interventions that I'll be getting into: sensory, motor, cognition, and speech and language. So we're going to move into sensory motor now and talk about rhythmic auditory stimulation. So rhythmic auditory stimulation is also gait training with music. So we're using rhythm to walk and to, get into a natural gait pattern. Walking is inherently symmetrical and inherently rhythmic. You spend an equal amount of time on one side than the other, pre-stroke or pre-injury. It's something you don't have to think about too much, but then after you've had an injury or stroke, it becomes, you have to relearn, and you realize how hard walking can be and how much goes into it. So we kind of give auditory stimulus and that rhythm to take one thing off of your plate, and that would be to really help with the symmetry, to help with the synchronization of both motor neurons, so like within the spine as well as the brain, to be able to predict when the next step is and to be able to help initiate the movement. So while I'm talking theoretically, it's always a lot easier to see it. I'm going to make sure, I think I forgot to share my sound when I shared my screen. So give me one moment. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll reshare it. Okay. So this is at an inpatient hospital in Boston. This man here has had a stroke. He's still in like the beginning stages of his recovery. He had been working with physical therapy for a few weeks now, and the physical therapist decided to bring in neurologic music therapy to help with kind of his symmetry, and as well as just to see if we can increase the speed of his walking. So I forgot to mention that part. A lot of the times post-stroke, you might see a big decrease in speed, and that makes it a lot more difficult to walk because the coordination of the movement is a lot harder. So what we can do is increase the tempo in a more gradual way, in a more natural way than maybe like if you were on the treadmill or something, to make it a little bit easier to coordinate as well. So you're spending less time on each foot, it becomes more natural, and we try to get to what we call like the most energy efficient and natural gait pattern for that individual. So here's a video.
Hurry up. Smiling. I'm almost done. Okay?
Yeah, almost here, without a cane.
Yes, plan. Okay. Hurry up. All right.
So as you can see, he's walking with a 3-point gait. So cane, step, step. That's a very unnatural way to walk. You have to pretty much relearn a completely new pattern to walk like that, since we're used to what we would say like is reciprocal stepping, so one foot in front of the other. So there's like a component of having to walk again, plus a new pattern. So as you can see, he was spending a bit more even time on each foot there. So we were increasing the tempo, so we would spend a little bit less time on with each foot in the air, pretty much. He's using the cane specifically for balance, so he doesn't have any weakness in his legs. So I want to say in this next clip, they're going to take the cane away and kind of work on just that reciprocal pattern. So one foot in front of the next, because when we take away this complete like relearning of a walking pattern, then we're able to get into a more natural pace. So what we just saw there was no device, a little bit slower. They're going to speed the tempo up. I would also like to say that this was all within one session. It's not always like that though. And the other thing that I will say is you're going to see a carryover now. Obviously, any therapy. You guys know each other from group, right? I'll just finish this after. So why is that carryover important? Obviously, I've had a lot of, even my own patients I've worked with that say, I can't have you walking in front of me with a guitar for the rest of my life, Vanessa. So in my opinion, any therapy that can't be functional and taken out of context is not successful therapy. And a lot of my colleagues believe that as well. So it's really important to say, okay, is what we're working on being carried over without music? Are we able to, still see that increased cadence, that reciprocal stepping? Are we able to see that improved coordination and balance so that we can take that device away for maybe forever, right? Or at least until it's, maybe it's like the step in the right direction. They go home with a device, but in outpatient, they're able to work on, walking without. So it's really important to all of us at MedRhythms that it's not just I need music to walk. It's the music is helping me walk better even after I'm done listening to it, even after X amount of weeks. It's really using that music to try and get to the most natural pattern again and really have that be where we're walking. So this is rhythmic auditory stimulation. Any questions on this? I'm going to talk a little bit about our device next. Yes.
Yes, I have a question. So all this was done in just one session, is it like one day?
Yeah, this was all done in one day, which I can't say is is not always what happens. This person was just a very good candidate. They had already had very intensive physical therapy for multiple weeks. So at least it's usually 1 hour a day for probably 2 or 3 weeks prior to music therapy coming in. So it was really just this like coordination and balance component and really working on that symmetry, which was what made having it just at one day successful. Obviously if there's a lot more weakness in one side or these other things, it can take a little bit longer. But
the person was able to do it in a more relaxed way, like that is what you're trying to emphasize here. Yeah.
Exactly, definitely. Yes, definitely. It's definitely like we're taking one thing out of your mind, which is when do I step, right? And kind of giving that signal to you. So it's like you can kind of focus on some of this other stuff that maybe you're letting kind of go by the wayside because there's so much to think about when you are walking again for the first time.
And just to get this right, so the rhythm that you are hearing automatically stimulates your brain to, walk in that rhythm. Is that the correct thing that I'm hearing?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, okay.
Our brain is able to like pick up on beat really quickly and just
beat?
like move to it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Of course.
Just to come in there, could we just avoid the music altogether and do it with the metronome, for example?
Yes, definitely. I have a lot of my colleagues at the hospital, as well as our other facility, who are physical therapists, and they, if I'm not there or there's no music therapist there, they kind of have their own metronomes and are able to, kind of do a version of RAS with their patients with just the metronome, and it's still something that people can really grab quickly. It's maybe not the most exciting sound, but it's definitely possible.
So the idea is essentially you're providing a trigger to the individual as to when to maybe move the next step, so that
exactly
he's in sync, the gait improves. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And then we're modulating that sound, right? Whether that's faster for stroke or maybe it's slower for other individuals, to be able to be more energy efficient and, kind of reach the goals we're trying to, whether that might be like a longer step length or, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Got it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ray, I see your hands up.
Yes, I was sort of listening to and watching the effect. You were playing a chord when you're playing a guitar, and I could identify some chords. And there was also the metronome effect. So do you think a chord makes the assimilation of sound as a musical cue for the brain through the auditory cortex better than the more simplistic monotonal metronomic sound? Because this was the question Dr. Sodhi just asked you, whether the metronome would be just as good. And I was very impressed by your patient improving so greatly in just one session. Is it the chord effect, which is, the whole spectrum of the sounds in the chord, in the guitar, compared to just one mono-aural sound? Your comments, please.
Yes, that's a great question. So I always find it's very much an individual experience. So for some people, even having like the guitar playing is too much stimulus, right? So you have to kind of think about, a lot of these people have just left, an acute care hospital. There's just a lot of other factors where some people just need the metronome and that's all they can handle, right? And they do a great job syncing to it. Other people having the extra stimulus of the guitar helps, and having multiple frequencies going helps. For other people, I use familiar music, because having like either the familiar song, the lyrics, any of this stuff can help them hear the beat better. So it's really like everyone perceives music differently. And it's always, as a clinician, it's trying to find the best stimulus for the individual. Some people I know love like a familiar music plus the metronome to really give that extra, beat perception. So it's really like, some people hear things a lot better than others, is really the best answer I can give. I don't think there's anything specific to the like tonalities of what we're playing. I always just try to make it different enough that you can hear the difference, but I've had a lot of people ask me like if the frequencies are aiding in the rehabilitation anyway, and there's no research on that, so I can't say I know for sure.
Thank you for that response. Thank you very much. There was two questions following on from what you just now said. Mr. Sodhi, can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, because you just heard about the and its effect, and you mentioned about the cultural effect of music. So have you done a trial whereby, yes, sorry, the question was, since you mentioned about the cultural effect of music, and we heard about the Carnatic music, and there's Western art music, and there is so many other forms of music internationally. So have you noticed any difference in the response of your stroke patients to the different forms of music if they have a cultural bias? Because it may not be useful to expose me on Hindustani music to Western art music, because I won't respond just as well. And the second thing is that if I'm a musician myself, would I be likely to be gaining more effect from these interventions than if it was musically naive? So two questions: cultural effect as well as pre-music exposure. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. There's definitely a lot of research on like familiar music, and that being much more beneficial than music that is like that you don't know. My approach, obviously as someone who's American and is only familiar with Western music, is if I had someone who maybe doesn't know Western music as much, I wouldn't do familiar music with them. I would probably just keep like a metronome and very like simple chords that can kind of that are cross culture, because that's the basis is the rhythm, and that's something that is universal, right? Everyone is exposed to rhythm, and especially very basic rhythm of just one beat kind of going forever. So that is a great question. There are a lot of people of all different so it's kind of like, what do we have in common within these two different cultures, and what can I still utilize for the best possible treatment? Is the answer to that question. I'm never going to try and push my culture onto someone else, especially if it's not going to be effective. There's no purpose in that. And then in terms, the second question, sorry, if you could repeat the second question, I lost it.
Yeah, the second question was previous exposure to music, whether it influences the recovery compared to somebody who hasn't been exposed to music. Everybody's exposed to music, but not in a prolonged manner. And a corollary to your previous answer would be basically, so is the pulse that you're indicating rather than the music that's more important? Because what you just now said, it's the pulse that's important, not the music at all, because these are different parts of the brain that register them. Anyway, your comment,
Yes,
you're a specialist.
Exactly. I would say that kind of being a musician can just make your understanding of what's happening a little bit easier, where if I'm like, okay, we're going to walk to the beat, I've had people that are like, what does that mean? But and then you also have already kind of been exposed to some of those neuroplastic changes that I talked about before, if you're a trained musician. And that can even be like if you sang in, choir for a few years, like you can have your brain can be different and have those like certain neuroplastic changes. So it's like not even like you've been a musician for years and years, but if you have some sort of understanding of music, it can be a little bit easier to understand what's happening and how it's affecting you. But yes, everyone has been exposed to music in some way. I personally haven't encountered anyone that, because there are some people that just don't get music. They're like, it's called amusia. I've never encountered those. There's a very small population of people who have that. So yes, I would say like can be easier if you're a musician, but it's not a requirement.
Thank you.
Of course. I'm going to talk about our device next. So what the digital therapeutic team is working on is kind of digitizing rhythmic auditory stimulation. So we're currently building clinically validated FDA prescription digital therapeutic. It's made up of three components, which are sensors you put on your shoes. We have like headphones to deliver music, and an app that has an algorithm that took a lot of time to formulate to kind of be able to analyze beat and how the patient or client is stepping, and then modulate it through an algorithmic change. We're currently working on areas for algorithms for stroke, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. And the idea is to be able to deliver this RAS to people all over the world. Hopefully, right now we're just working on America, I think, to have personalized music and really be able to help these people walk again, especially when, at least in the United States, the healthcare system is not great. And, after a certain amount of time post-stroke or post-injury, insurance just says, well, this is the best you can do. You're not allowed to have therapy anymore. So that's kind of the idea behind the device. This is another video that really kind of wraps up nicely. We're currently kind of sending out products for people that we know and our former clients to test. And this is one of them.
Hi, I'm Christy Bellows, and I had my stroke about 6 years ago now. 6 months before I had my strokes, I had retired from being an assistant teacher at a Montessori school, and stroke got in my way. It was a pretty severe stroke as far as what I've been told. Therapy started with people coming to the house, and I was left with nothing except the support group. And that's where MedRhythms came in. The way I would say it is just walking to music, to rhythm, to a little bit at a time. They increase the speed that you were walking to. I really feel that it's really helped me. And my physiatrist, he was so impressed at how much I had improved that he said, come back and see me in a month. We've been with MedRhythms ever since then. The music started, and it felt so great that I started to work.
In the morning, the sun. In the evening, the sun. In the morning, the sun. It's another day I wake and delay, pondering why I'm in disarray. Manipulation, man, it feeds the beast. Anything to grasp my next release. In the morning, the sun. In the evening, the sun.
It's not only my life, it's Bill's life too, because as a result of it, I have come such a long way that there's no way he would have left me at home alone anytime. Now he does. And it's all thanks to MedRhythms. Don't give up on us.
Okay, so that's kind of how our device works. It's able to use, now we have a huge library of music. We recently signed a contract with Universal Music Group, and it's able to kind of change the, stretch out the music a little bit to fit the BPMs we're trying to hit. And then I think if you could hear it slightly on that last fastest walk, that the metronome came in to kind of give a little bit extra kind of beat salience as well. I don't know a ton about the device since I'm very technology illiterate, but I am still happy to answer any questions. And then I kind of brought in, this is our feasibility study, which was on chronic stroke at varying functioning levels. Our results that we've found were that the speed of these individuals increased by an average of 11%. And as kind of a secondary gain, but not what we were looking for, energy expenditure reduced by 10% on average, which is just really awesome data about this product. And it's kind of, we just want to be able to reach all the people that we can't physically reach. So any questions on the device and the digital therapeutic?
Yes, doctor. Yes, doctor, I think you can ask.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it was a wonderful video of a patient improving so dramatically. On critical analysis, it seems to be a mood effect rather than actually a stroke improvement effect, because we all dance in discos and all the rest of it. And over there, even normal human beings take cues from the pace of the beat and dance along to it. So I would imagine that, first of all, there's an antidepressant effect of music that may be seen and observed here. Plus, auditory cue to make the person walk faster. So basically, this device is potentially working on the gait mechanisms within the system, which I think through some form of apathy, depression, may be inhibited. And all that the music is doing is liberating that side of the individual to increase the stride length, the stance, and the gait. And there are 6 cycles of gait. Which cycle of the gait is this working on? Because you're having to time the music, isn't it? What's the effect of that sensor on the foot? And how is it syncing with the earphones is my technical question. I know you are technical.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sensors on the foot are grabbing all the data. So what you don't see in this is originally you do a baseline walk without any music. And the sensors are grabbing that data so we can find out where this individual should start. Then it's seeing how well are they stepping, like it can kind of analyze the symmetry of the gait. It can analyze like how well are they entraining to the rhythm itself. And then it can modulate the beat based off of that, which is all within like the algorithm. So those sensors are just grabbing all the data it needs to input into the algorithm for the best individualized experience. So I would say that it's really working on all gait cycles, but the big ones, and this is all about beat perception as well. So some people find it easier. They like use the beat or the rhythmic stimulus for like the step through. So they find it easier to like lift their foot, right? But then what I see most of the time is that the beat is kind of using it for like the heel strike and follow through. So it kind of is within all gait cycles, right? We're really working, but I'd say you're usually using the beat for like that heel strike down and bring your leg through. And then in terms of the music, right? So there are some really cool studies. I don't have any of them on my slide deck that say familiar music increases endurance. So that's like something I always say, like you can always take home, right? If you are someone who likes to go to the gym or exercise, if you run to familiar music or if you do anything to familiar music, your endurance is gonna boost up. But also, yes, I think that there's definitely a secondary gain of mood being boosted. Also because we're doing our best to give these people back, their independence. I always say like, you don't realize how walking is kind of like independence. As Christy said, like her husband wouldn't have left her home alone on her own because he was always so worried for her, but being able to, walk a little bit better and, a bit more symmetrical has kind of given him the confidence as well as herself to be more independent, which is something, everyone loves to have independence. Everyone loves to be able to say like, I can do this on my own. I don't need someone else, especially these older adults that have, been living for 60, 70, 80 years independently, and then had a single incident that took that away.
Thank you. Sorry, I keep asking intrusive questions because I'm very interested in this area. Neurology and a bit of music as well. Your energy expenditure is looking at me in the face, reduced by 10%. And that's very intriguing. How did you measure it? What energy? I'm just wondering about that claim of 10%. Speed, I understand.
Yes. So the idea, right, is when you increase speed to a more natural gait, to probably what people were walking before. So this kind of average is if you're in your 20s, you're probably walking around 130 steps per minute. And then as you age, it decreases a little bit, but you're still walking probably around like 110 steps per minute at around like 60 years old. This is on average. Everyone has different stride lengths, and like I have longer legs than my torso. So, things like that. Looking at energy and expenditure is having to like keep your foot up in the air, like right in those gait cycles to follow through is a lot more energy than you realize. So we're looking at energy expenditure of like, how much can you tolerate? So like, are we taking less breaks? Are we walking for longer? It's kind of like that endurance aspect. But being able to walk faster and more natural also takes less energy because we're kind of trying to find the best speed for the individual, because, you know, it's like less coordination. So it's like that between like jogging and like a stroll, like what's the most efficient way to use our energy and speed?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on the device? I have 2 more interventions I'll kind of briefly go over because I just want to make sure there's time.
I just wanted to come in here, Vanessa. Just a device that you mentioned, is it a temporary situation? Like at the end of that video, we see that the lady is not using the device. So you need it only for a period of time till she has got the gait back and then the device comes back to you. What happens then?
Yeah, so what I want to say is we're aiming for a prescription model. So, you know, physicians and or like, yeah, mostly physicians would put a prescription in for, right now I want to say we're doing it on like a 3-month basis, or this is the plan, like a 3-month basis for to do like at least 30 minutes a day of RAS with the device, to help with walking, and then kind of see, oh, do we want to continue this, like, or is it all right to end this prescription based off of the individual? So it really is like, once again, that individualized experience. Once again, I always say, like, it's important that we can see that this isn't just you have to walk with music everywhere you go. So once again, this kind of brings us back to that like widespread activation neuroplasticity, using the music as engaging multiple areas of the brain. So we're hoping that doing this at intense enough intervals and frequently enough is going to create that neuroplastic change, is going to create new neural pathways so that the walking stays consistent and that the walking remains how it is without music.
Okay, I had one more follow-up question to that. I think we'll go back to Dr. Ray. Is there a period of, is the device, how do I put it? Does it adapt? Is there a training period for the device where it is adapting to the individual? You know, measuring what the individual's gait should be, given her, for example, weight or stride, so as to get some reference point, and then targeting to reach that reference point over the next period of therapy. Is this some training period in the device, with the device training itself?
So our CEO, Brian Harris, is also a neurologic music therapist, and he pretty much created the algorithm where he was like, it was like there was a giant whiteboard, and he said, okay, if this happens, the algorithm needs to do this. Like if this happens, that happens. So once again, those sensors on the feet are getting real-time data, like at every second of the intervention, and is inputting that data into the algorithm so that it's able to modify and we're able to reach the goals we want to. I hope that answered the question. So yes, it's constantly getting information to be able to respond to that. And you always take a baseline because every day is different for the individual, right? You know, some days you haven't walked at all, or you've had a very, you know, low energy day. And then some days you've had like 10 million appointments and you're just exhausted. So your walking will be different. So before every session, you take a baseline and you go from there, which, you know, is I don't know if that answered it, but I hope it did.
So the device is kind of, it's a plug and play kind of situation. Just take it out of the box and you don't need to have it tuned to something. It adapts itself to the individual and then it sets the baseline and then it tries to improve upon that. Is that doing it correctly? Huh?
Yeah, so we've been doing all we can to make this like very user friendly, because, you know, we're very aware of the populations that we work with, and that, you know, maybe it's, you don't just have deficits with walking, maybe there's other things, and we don't want it to be really difficult to be able to participate in interventions or to even like have someone set it up for you or something like that. We just want you to be able to say like, okay, I put the sensors on my feet, I put my headphones in, turn the app on, and you're ready to go.
And that's what we see. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we see in the site also, right? I saw that.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
But
it was. Mhm.
are these apps available in Play Store, like just for us to try or something?
So not at the moment. We're still in, like, we're still doing a lot of like approval, and there's still a lot that's happening to like iron everything out. I don't know anything about like when things will be available or whatnot. We're still, doing a lot of clinical trials to make sure that what we can claim, what we're claiming, even though we kind of know it to be true. We just need the data.
Isn't this totally non-invasive and you can actually, try it on many people? Like I can see that there are, I mean, like, why don't you give a trial in this group itself? Like that's what I.
Yeah. Well, right now there's a lot of like hospitals that we're doing these clinical trials at. So it is like out there, but not in a, in the way that it will eventually be out there. Yeah. So we're really just in like a data collection phase still.
Do you really invite data from any part of the world?
I'm actually not sure about that. It's something I don't know.
I see there is a small form to fill up where you're asking on clinical trials for people. Is the invitation extend to all the part of the world or only to your New York center?
I would actually have to. I'd have to ask, but I'm happy to ask and find out.
Yeah, because there are many people over here who would volunteer.
Yes, I'm sure. And it might be like right now we're not, but in the future we will be. It's like we know that this is something that can help people all over the globe. So
yeah, because as Dr. Ray said, the cultural music also, like you can improvise your app on different cultural musics, and probably it may prove that it's effective for this region.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll have to ask some of my colleagues on the digital side about that, and I can get back to you all.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Of course.
Dr.
So
Ray, you
I'm
have something to say? Dr. Ray?
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
No, I'm very grateful. This is turning out to be a very engaging talk because NMT, Michael Thorpe in Vancouver, yourselves there, and Professor Shantala Hegde in NIMHANS in Bangalore, I only know of very few people who are very much into the field. Now, the question was basically, you are working on stroke patients, and I look forward to your two further devices. The question was, the aphasia, Broca's aphasia, the cadence of speech, the same things that apply to walking also apply to talking. And then, of course, the combination of being able to talk and walk at the same time, which is often impaired in post-stroke subjects. Does your device work on the Broca's aphasia who have a difficulty in walking? Have you done a parallel study to study the effect on speech cadence?
We have not. Right now, it's really all focused on RAS. As like myself, I work with people that have Broca's aphasia and apraxia. Most of my clients actually are people I work on with speech. It's not something that we've targeted with the device, like in a device yet. I know that eventually we would like to be able to, digitize it. It's just not something we've done, and we haven't done any even though this is what we're working on, what are the secondary benefits? Just because we're still on the what are the claims we can make, and are we getting the data that what's our data saying, or does our device work? Is kind of where we're at yet, that we can't do these secondary benefits, secondary gains on other functioning systems. But that is a great question. And I will talk about speech and language now, which is a great segue as well.
Before you had a segue into apraxia. Have you worked your device on apraxia of gait? Sorry, I'm getting a bit technical,
Oh,
just because
yes.
I'm medical.
Mhm.
Just for my friends, I'm actually a
Mhm.
a patient participant advocate out here. So basically, it's a condition who do not know about gait apraxia is that some patients, even after a stroke or from some other diseases, have difficulty in initiating walking, because
Mhm.
walking is very complex in human beings because we've evolved from four-legged to two-legged. And there are some patients who have difficulty in kickstarting or switching the ignition on, as it were, in the car to get the start started. So does your device work in those patients who have difficulty in initiating gait? Not necessarily Parkinsonian, that's different
Mhm.
altogether. But
Yes.
here, just gait apraxia. Have you done any work on that?
Yeah, so I'm not positive of like specifically the patients that we've done like those studies on. I know from my clinical practice that working on like that initiation coordination, rhythmic auditory stimulation is great for it, simply because we're kind of supplying and our brains are recognizing the pattern. So being able to say, okay, here's the next beat, it kind of gives that signal for initiation versus having to pretty much coordinate all of that yourself to say, okay, I'm going to take a step and I have to lift up my leg and I have to put it down, right? Which is extra hard when you have these coordination deficits, like ataxia. So supplying that auditory stimulus makes it a lot easier to initiate because our brains can recognize the pattern. It can synchronize with the rhythm from our brain neurons to our spinal cord. So the answer is yes. I don't know if any of the participants of our feasibility studies or clinical trials have like an ataxia, but I would assume some of them do.
I meant apraxia, not ataxia.
Oh.
Apraxia of gait.
Okay, yes. I still don't know if any of our participants have an apraxia of gait, but I do know that rhythmic auditory stimulation helps with initiation because we're taking away the thinking of having to initiate. We're kind of supplying it instead.
Thank you.
Okay, so speech and language. What we find in speech and language, right, after a stroke is that sometimes people are able to sing, but they are not able to speak. This is to go back to that widespread activation. So when we participate in singing, since we have activation on both hemispheres instead of just the left. So for anyone who doesn't know, the left hemisphere is where the language centers are. We're kind of able to recruit from the right side of the brain to reach our functional goals. So I primarily work with people with Broca's aphasia. I have worked with people that have a more fluent or Wernicke's aphasia, but the interventions are really designed for people with Broca's aphasia, as well as an apraxia of speech, which is a coordination deficit. So the big two interventions I'll talk about are melodic intonation therapy and rhythmic speech cueing. So melodic intonation therapy, we're able to kind of use music and singing, like a sing-songy melody, to practice and with repetition, functional phrases. So, that can be different for the individual. I've done ones that are, just like my name is blank. The video I'll show has like a how are you? So we kind of take these sing-songy phrases that are a little bit easier to produce due to, the song-like nature of them. And we repeat them enough that we're able to transition them back into regular speech. So we're recruiting from the right side of the brain using music and using singing, and then using enough repetition that we're able to go back to speaking these phrases. And then I'll talk about rhythmic speech cueing after. So in this video, you'll see using familiar music kind of as a way to prime the brain and prime that right side, as well as melodic intonation therapy. Of course, the things are playing. I don't want them to. Okay. It won't let me go full screen. But this is Peter. He suffered from a stroke.
Try it again.
So this is a span of months. Speech is always a lot harder to get back.
I'm Peter. I'm Peter. I'm Peter. How are you? How are you? Hello, I'm Peter. How are you? I am good. Thank you. How are you? You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray.
So using music and using singing to get some functional speech back. As you could tell, that after video, there was still like a bit of like sing-songy to Peter's voice, but much less than originally, as well as, you know, more intelligibility, able to just say what he wants to say. Any questions on melodic intonation therapy?
Well, this proves that singing and speaking are different things. And
Yes.
the classical Broca areas that we have all been talking about for what, 150 years is not as accurate as the actual systems within the brain in the neural nodes, internodes, and networking. We're basically using the musical oral intonation, the melodic balance in the brain to push the speech elements forward. The moment the music stops or the guitar stops strumming, there is some residual effect, but not as good. You could see that because speech is driven by different processes than when we sing. It's different process. It's not the same as speech.
It is. Yes. So, and that's really why it's like really about repetition, because we're really trying to create neurologic change within the brain by recruiting these areas that are used for music production and used for singing to make it a little bit easier to speak.
Neuronal crosstalk. That's what this device is doing, or the musical therapists are doing, isn't it?
It pretty much, yeah. It's I always like when I'm trying to be very impressive, I'm like, you know, I rewire people's brains for a living.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, but it is. It's really working on linking both hemispheres of the brain, and yes, exactly. So rhythmic speech cueing is pretty much using rhythm again, right? Since we're kind of focused on coordination to either help with the coordination of motor speech planning, or working on, you know, the frequency and of your speech. So, you know, if you have dysarthria, so a weakness, and you're used to talking really quickly, we're using rhythm to kind of slow down the speaking, increase the intelligibility. And then in this case, in this video, we have an apraxia of speech. So it's using rhythm in a similar way to how we were with gait training to help with the motor planning, and use rhythm to help with those neurons firing and syncing up. So it becomes a little bit easier to coordinate.
June, July, August, September, October, what and said
That's okay. Try this last one.
he and
June, July. Try it again.
July, August,
September. Try it again.
Vanessa, could you increase the volume? Is it possible?
Yes, I think. Sorry about that.
Could you, can we have it again, please, from the beginning?
Yes. All right. Sorry about that.
August, tap-handed, up-holded, wet and said.
That's okay. Try this last one.
He and
June, July. Try it again.
July, August,
September. Try it again. October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Try that. December. These are the months of the year. Here we go. January, February, March, April, May,
June, July, August,
September,
October,
November, December. These are the months of the year.
March, April, May, June, July, August.
You can be proud of that. That was good. Yeah, August. September. Good. Next one.
October. November.
Okay.
December.
Nice job. Much better.
So using rhythm and in this case also melody, since she had both aphasia and apraxia, to work on that articulation and coordination of speech. Any questions on any of these speech interventions? Yes, Dr.
Yes, doctor. I think you can.
Yes, I didn't want to always hog the circuit. Very interesting. Thank you. No, it's really a very stimulating lecture. I saw a lot of cueing from visual afferents. The patient was lip reading quite a lot of the time. Lip reading, and your therapist was also pointing to her own lips. There was an auditory cue as well as a visual cue to pronunciation that I could find. So that was a secondary effect we just saw. One. And the second thing is that when the patient was not listening to the music, the speech was faltering. So just as a suggestion, would keeping a background metronome on through earplugs for the patient or some form of melodic intervention ongoing help the patient with speech production on a regular basis is the question. Because you see, when you have an effect, it is there for 100% when the music is playing and when the lip reading is carrying on. The moment it stops, the effect starts to fade. And afterwards, when the patient turned away, we saw less of the effect remaining. So why don't you carry on with some form of subtle musical cue ongoing in the patient's ears, unilaterally or bilaterally, to see if that causes a sustained effect or a sustenance of the effect. Just a suggestion. Questions?
Yes. I think that, so because these are videos to try and show, like, I wouldn't say this is what a normal session would look like. Like, at least my sessions tend to be very like intensive, really using rhythm the whole time if I'm working on apraxia, or, you know, taking very little like carryover breaks per se. But it is one of those things where we don't want someone to feel like dependent on an additional auditory source. So to just like function in their lives. I do always tell my patients I work with, I'm like, most of them have metronome apps so they can kind of work on it themselves and like homework, whether that's, you know, like reading out loud or something. I say like, this is what we're like, this is the beat we're at, you know, use it when you feel like you want to. But it's one of those things where if you're having a normal conversation with someone, like, you're not going to say like, oh, let me put my metronome on and go from there. I do think it's one of those things where, you know, I and all of us as clinicians give all the resources we can to our clients and patients, but then it's really up to the individual to use them. And then
to carry over from Dr. Partha said, I and what you added, I think that would be the goal, isn't it? To
it's
independent, say patient without relying, as you said. So does that happen in your experience? Does that happen fairly often that patients do become independent? They do not need to rely upon an external music or an external cueing, as you say.
Definitely. There are people I've worked with that, you know, we've discharged from services. We said, hey, like we, you know, and I feel like a lot of people that stay with us tend to be like perfectionists, and they're always like, well, I can do even better. I can do even better. But, you know, we're like, no one would know that you had a stroke based off of how you speak anymore. You know, as much as we love working with you, you know, there's not much that we can do anymore to help you further on in your journey. And in general, that's what, you know, therapy is about. It's about, you know, I never want someone to be reliant on music to speak. I want to be using the music as an intervention to get them to be able to, you know, live life how they want to live.
As a follow-up to Mr. Sodhi's idea, it's not a bad thing to wear spectacles to be able to read or to use a hearing aid to be able to hear better. So I don't see a problem if I had a stroke to have a auditory cue all the time, or in fact a laser cue which gives me a blip of red light on my spectacle frames, which helps me speak with the right cadence. You know, people with stammering, stuttering, speech defects, including in children, have used all sorts of cues because the effect of cueing is transient. It's building on transient neuronal circuits you're building up as part of your wiring process, which doesn't last long. And the dose effect is clearly there. There's, of course, a ceiling effect. So, you know, there is no harm in stimulating during the waking hours. It's just to help someone to read by wearing spectacles. Otherwise, I can't read. So I wear spectacles. I can't speak. So I use auditory cueing. Is there a harm in that in your study that you have found out?
I don't think so either. I've thought the same thing before. I'm like, well, if I ever had, you know, an injury or something and I couldn't speak anymore, I would really use all of my knowledge all the time. But obviously I can't monitor people I can always tell them, I say, I send them the app that I use and I tell them, this is what we're speaking at now. When I increase it, I let them know. But once again, you know, I can give all of the resources available. I make a lot of videos for people, all this stuff. But it's really up to them to decide how they want to use it in their daily life outside of our sessions. But I've thought the same thing where I'm like, if this happened to me, I'd probably have a metronome, like one headphone in at all times, just going.
Thank you.
Mhm.
But again,
Any?
just carrying off from there, Vanessa, I'm just speaking as a layman here. You know, I would imagine the purpose of all this practice would be to develop neuroplasticity, develop pathways, so that once they are developed with exercise, perhaps the dependence, you know, on cueing, etc., should diminish, because otherwise, maybe those pathways are not developing. You know.
Yes, exactly. Which is
so-
definitely the point.
Yeah,
It's,
so
you know,
that-
and a lot of it is like fading out cues so that, you know, they need us less and less. That's really the point.
And as you say, a large number of people do become independent there, and they do carry on. Yep. Good. Please carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So this therapy is for generally for motor activities like walking and speech alone, or is there an extension of the therapy even more in any other fine motors or something? Because I have, I mean, my stroke was 5 years before, so I have massively improved on the gross motor skills. But how does it really influence me on the fine motor skills, if any? Because I'm a musician, I'm not been touching my instrument for the past 5 years because of this. So any other improvements or on this?
Yeah. I don't have a video of it, but definitely, I always love working on fine motor with people, but I don't get to see it a lot because I work in inpatient rehab hospital. So, you know, there are more important things to work on. But using rhythm, once again, helps with all types of coordination. So, you know, I've used rhythm to help people, like using like the piano as a way to kind of translate to like typing on a keyboard, and just having like doing exercises, fine motor exercises. A lot of the times we use instruments because they give that auditory feedback of like saying, I'm doing the right movement that we're looking for. So that can be, you know, shaker to work on like wrist activation or like drums. Once again, the piano, I've even had people that want to play the guitar again. So we use rhythm and just do like scales, one finger at a time, you know, with like a lot of breaks to help kind of activate that as well. There's some really cool, they're kind of old studies from the past decade, maybe a decade ago, on using rhythm and how it, for like, you know, upper extremity and fine motor activation. It shows that when you use rhythm, your muscles are activating more consistently in terms of like amount as well as when. So it's just like the strength utilized as well as how often they're activating is syncing up with the beat as well.
So it is used.
Yeah.
In
Yes.
Because I'm like interested to know. I'm a Veena player basically. I've been trying to get through the speed with which I was playing pre-stroke. I'm not able to do that still. So.
Yeah. Well, it's like as a musician, you might feel like it's where you're just like practicing with like this very slow metronome, and you're just like you get sent back.
Stage.
Yeah, exactly. You get like sent back to like when you were young. You were like, man, I remember when my teacher would make me do this for like hours. But you know, it's once again kind of like using that like dual hemispheric activation and kind of rhythm, which can activate a lot of our motor cortex to just kind of and repetition to get that function back again.
Yes. So, okay, thank you.
Of course.
Can I come in here on the music?
If
Mr. Sodhi, can I
say
something?
Yes, Doctor. Yes, I think you can. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's answer to your question, madam. Did you say you are a musician and that you are trying to get back to full speed? Mr. Sodhi, can I have 1 minute to explain?
Please carry on, sir.
Yes.
Well,
yeah. What's happening out here is I'm a musician as well, and I've also not been practicing my violin for 2 months now. And this happens periodically. And whenever I come back to my instrument, I find that often I have to start with 2 or 3 lower grades of music to be able to pick up the speed. Now, I have spoken to virtuosos, like the Juilliard. Did you say you're from New York? So you know the Juilliard School of Music, yeah? Yeah. And Ray Chen is there. You might know the violinist or may not know him. Yeah. So I asked Ray Chen when he was down in Liverpool as to how he can play these passages. And basically, it's the practice element. The brain works by making very fast calculations of small movements in small pieces and then strings them together like a bead. Now, what the theory is that virtuosos know when they haven't practiced for 48 hours that their skill is going down. By about a week, the orchestra gets to know about it. And by about a month, the public will get to know about it. So the intention is to practice and practice on a regular, like a dose effect. So this is because there are many complex movements taking place and not all of it is voluntary. A lot of it is basically involuntary and coordinated reflex movements. Like, put in a particular piece when you're playing Paganini, or if you're playing a very complex Carnatic music piece, the same thing will apply. So if it applies for the highest functioning, highest evolved musical brains who are executing fine motor movements, just imagine what will happen to lesser mortals like me if I have a stroke and then I'm trying to get my pace up to where it was before I had the stroke. So I think there's clearly a dose effect, a practice effect, a cueing effect, and neuronal plasticity, because it depends upon the outgrowth of neurons, is not as hardwired as the original neurons. So they have to be constantly fed and promoted and massaged to keep growing in the direction we want them to grow. The moment we stop encouraging them to grow, be it through physiotherapy and motor movements, speech therapy for language, or even musical therapy, which is working on the entire brain in all the circuits, there will always be a dropout rate after some time. And you will never be able to maintain that level of expertise of the recovering neuronal function the moment you stop practicing or exercising or applying that impulse for 48 hours to 7 days. The effect is always going to be less. And I think plasticity is dynamic. It's never filling up the jug all the time. There's always a hole in the jug, and you have to keep constantly topping up. Is the theory. I think the thing works. You've set all of us thinking, because I was just reading up effect of Tal, which means beat, on the human brain, which is centuries old in Indian classical musical literature. There's a small book I was reading yesterday, and it seemed that this effect was known thousands and thousands of years ago in the Indian and ancient literature of recovery and healing. So effect of Tal on music, I'll put the name out on the chat box. It's also very much relevant to what you are doing now in a very modern way with applications, but it's all been there in the old literature. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. I always think like what I'm doing is not new per se, everyone and so many cultures know the healing effect music has, and it's just presented in a way that now we can like look at how the brains are actually being affected and in this kind of modern medicine way. But that is a really great point. In general, one of the things that is the basic of neuro rehab is, you use it or you lose it. And I always say, like, because I'm terrible at forming good habits, is that it's like, if it means just practicing for 5 minutes at first, and just working like a little bit and then increasing the time or increasing the frequency, that's going to be, your best friend.
That's right.
It's just starting, like, it's terrible to say starting over, especially after you've mastered a certain level of your instrument, but it's kind of what has to happen, unfortunately.
I do it in 2 monthly cycles. I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, exactly. Me too, with the piano. I've been playing it for years, and every once in a while I'm like, I should really practice my scales,
I was actually probably telling you about the Tal thing when I started, I suppose, right? There's something called Talam, which is very useful for the mathematics in kids. That is the concept that Dr. Ray is also saying here. So
I'll have to read into that. It sounds very, very interesting to
It
me.
is the same. It kind of is the same thing as your rhythm. That's what. So almost
that.
all the Indian songs, they fall into that 8-beat category where you can actually, you can reproduce a song in different. All the songs come under the same category.
Yeah, the book is called Indian Musical Rhythm Analysis, Understanding Tal Shastra. Is the book on Amazon.
Okay.
Can you write it in the chat here?
That would be great.
I will.
Thank you.
So my last, I'll kind of briefly go over this, which is kind of targeting cognition.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
Dr. Sethi. Yeah, Mr. Sethi, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes,
I want to ask how much time is required to speak properly, and what are factors on which it depends.
Okay, he asking how much time and what are the factors.
Yes. So obviously every individual is different. And a big factor is definitely like what your goals are, right? So I have, some people are just like, I just want to be able to say some very functional things. Can we just work on that? And they might, end up not having music therapy for as long because we're just working on a few basic phrases. Or they might just be wanting kind of like almost like a tune-up on their walking. So it might not be as drastic. So severity is a big factor. So some people I have that are, a bit more high level, they just kind of maybe need like a little like ironing out, might only be with us for a few months till they're satisfied and feel like they've reached their goals. Well, we have some people that have been with us for years because when they like just love it, or they're always just looking for one more, like, we reach our goal and I say, okay, we've reached our goal. Do you want to make a new goal or do we want to discontinue services? They say, okay, let's work on this thing now. So it might be like they started on speech and now we're working on some like memory. So it's really always an individual preference, and it can vary depending on the severity of the case.
Okay, does that answer the question, Dr. Mrs. Sethi? Okay. Any other questions, Dr. Ray?
All right, then I will move on to cognition. So
yes, please carry on. Thank you.
So I won't talk about musical neglect training. What that really is using, so if you've had a neglect to one side or an inattention, we're kind of able to use auditory stimulus instead of visual to really bring attention to that side through repetition. This is something I usually treat inpatient. It's very, possible to treat it elsewhere, but I won't get too deep into that. So the video is not there. So the two I'll talk about are music attention control training and executive functioning. So these are, cognition is a beast, and we still don't know a ton about it, but we can use music as a stimulus to keep attention, and kind of increase our attention by changing how we're hearing the music. So maybe we start with something like a very simple pattern, and then if we see the attention to start to fade, we change the music to grab that attention again, which is one application of music and stimulus for attention. We're able to also use auditory stimulus to kind of scale attention. So maybe it's moving to if you hear X but don't hear this, then do this. It's like a lot of cognition games, I guess, and music games. using different auditory sources and instruments. And then executive functioning training can target a lot of things, whether that's, organization of tasks and various levels of memory, whether that's, echoic, working, like short-term memory. We can use music for this because, music is a very organized stimulus. So, there are a lot of rules to music that even if you're not a musician are very much like implied sonically. So, if I play one thing versus another and I say, hey, which one sounds better, right? You're able to pick based off of rules you might not recognize. So we can kind of use this as like a writing song task or something else where we really have to like stay on task and organize a step-by-step process. And then kind of to like in most therapy, like in a normal therapy way, to really like think about our thought process and how can we carry this over to like normal life, whether that's like making lists for the grocery store or like your morning routine. How can we organize ourselves better and what tools are helpful? You can also use this for memory because it's just a different type of auditory a different type of stimulus to remember. So sometimes we all have different ways to remember things. I, as a musician, am an auditory learner. So it's a lot easier for me to pick up melodies than someone else might. For other people, it might be more of a visuals are better or something, like spatially, it's easier for them to pick up information. So being able to kind of use music as a way to figure out what works best for you and what will help you be successful in your everyday life. So I'm going to show a video on music attention control training.
The sun. Here comes the sun. And I say it's alright.
So that's how we can kind of use different types of auditory stimulus to maintain attention and work on it. And then I'll also show this executive functioning video.
So do I go to the other
So
side?
take it from here.
Okay.
So if it was started there, ended there,
So I'll go this way.
we're gonna go back, and then where? Skip, and then back, skip, almost. Okay, so we'll go. Go back. Skip. Go back. Skip. And back. Good.
So that was, really like recognizing patterns, which is a huge, skill to have that we don't realize we use a lot of the time. But our brain is able to make snap judgments because of the patterns that it understands and can see. Any questions on cognition?
I was just wondering, Vanessa, this is part of what MedRhythms does, or is it something that you do in your own practice?
So MedRhythms is two separate divisions. So we have the digital therapeutic, and then we have a clinical practice. So the speech and cognition is what our clinical practice does. We also obviously treat gait, but the digital division is only working on the device.
Okay.
But these videos are all our clinicians practicing NMT, usually within an inpatient rehab setting. Some of them are in home.
Okay, fine. Yeah. That was interesting, actually, a good demo of pattern recognition based upon music therapy. One could see the jumbled up and then a much more organized way of looking at things. And those bell-like things that one presses, what are they called? Are they readily available?
Yeah, they're called desk bells. You can definitely just like get them on Amazon. But they're a weird staple in our toolbox as music therapists because they have so much different stimulus. They have like the auditory stimulus. Since they're all different colors, you get the visual. You can kind of lay them out in in certain spaces to work on. It gives a lot of awesome cues to help and help figure out what people
and I would imagine if I knew a little bit of music, I could even perhaps play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something like that.
Yes.
Will motivate me.
Yes, we have and that's like a great following directions. So we have little handouts sometimes that are just the color of the bell to see how well can you just follow a written direction using bells without the actual, with just a visual.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of possibilities there, of taking the various parts of the brain to engage. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Definitely. Of course. Yes.
Yeah. On that particular, was it interval identification? I wasn't so sure what was happening there. Was it a second, fifth interval identification that the therapist was doing, or was just a color identification?
Yeah, so
arranged in definitely a scalar fashion, those things that are making sounds.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily an auditory perception task, which we can do. We can work on auditory perception. It was, so what the therapist was doing 3 or 4 bells to set the pattern and was asking the patient to finish the rest. So it's saying, if I give you this information, what comes next? I like to describe it.
A call and answer phenomena.
I describe it as, I don't know if at least when I took math in elementary school, it'd be you'd have 2, 4, blank, 8, and you'd have to fill in what was what's the missing number and identify what the pattern was. And you'd be it's going up by 2. So it's kind of similar to that, but through music instead. So the first one was to go back 1 and then skip over, then back again, skip over. And then the other one we saw at the end was just the ends on each side and then working towards the middle.
Do, mi, so, and then they say re. So basically you are skipping a note, an interval, going from the first to the third to the fifth. Is that what they were doing? I was just asking about what the patient was doing, because the patient was in a bed, and what was the therapist doing? I wasn't too sure.
Yeah, so the therapist was setting up the pattern. So here, let me go back.
Yeah.
And I can.
Because
So
there's
in like this,
Yeah.
yeah. So in this last one, let's see if I can get the therapist's hand. Oh, here, we'll do this one. So the first,
7 notes are there anyway.
yeah. So the first, that hand that's right there is the therapist. So he's setting up the pattern.
Okay.
So he wanted it to go back one and then skip. Or I was a liar. But to go.
The xylophone arrangement.
Is just in a scale.
It's a scalar pattern. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Was that the question? I'm so sorry. Yeah, so it's just set up in a 7 or 8 note scale. Okay, and then the last thing I'll talk about for cognition is using music to store information. So a musical mnemonic. The best example of this would just be like any jingle you've ever heard. Advertisement makes use of mnemonics very, very well in kind of storing musical information, and then when you hear it, you can just like finish it immediately. So we can do that with actually important information versus just advertisements. So creating like catchy jingles for people that might have difficulty remembering important information like their address. Maybe they want to remember their phone number or like their caregiver's phone number. So kind of creating catchy ways and using repetition to store that information. So it becomes a bit more natural, and maybe they just need like a single note cue to remember the rest. I've also done this with people's morning routines. So like, kind of going step by step of like, all right, we're gonna brush our teeth now, and then do X, do X, do X in a musical mnemonic to make their morning a bit more organized for themselves. All right, and that is the end of this presentation. Thank you all so much for staying on for so long. I really appreciate it. So some of the frequently asked questions is, if you're X amount of years post-injury or diagnosis, will you still benefit? The answer is yes. Obviously, there's something to be said about the closer you are to incident, the more effective therapy can be. But I've worked with people that are, 5, 8 years post-injury that still benefit, and still they feel the difference. Their therapists see the difference and are able to benefit from this therapy. How often do I have to participate? So every individual is different. MedRhythms, the clinical practice, is a private pay organization, so it's always up to the client. I would say that clinically, for gait, we always say like 3 times a week for an hour is what's recommended in terms of, the studies done and the research out there. Obviously frequency and duration is a very important fact to recovery. But, I also have people that I see 1 time a week for an hour, or 2 times a week for an hour that benefit greatly. If I'm unable to use one side of my body, would I still be able to participate in treatment? I always say it depends. So if it's like a teletherapy, it might be a bit more difficult if you have like a sided weakness, just because, having a person there to really give like the extra help, to give like hand over hand is really important to, getting that functioning back. But you're definitely still able to participate. And I'm saying, if the other one I'll talk about is, what are the resources that you can use in home? I always say, if you learn anything from this entire presentation, it is to use music in your life. And, whether that's just like listening to music while you walk or while you exercise, if it means singing along to songs a bit more, I maybe like just like, and participating in music more than you might be now, even if that's in a more casual manner, community manner, to just, there's a lot of great secondary gains to just participating in music, even if it's not a targeted intervention, like you've been seeing for this presentation. Those are kind of the big ones I like to hit. Are there any other questions? I'd be happy to answer them.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for this presentation. Listening to music while walking is also kind of therapy. So really got a lot of information from this session. And if you can, extend the, applications to other parts of the country also, we'll be very glad to volunteer and help.
Yes, I will. I'll put that on my to-do list to make sure to contact our digital team about it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vanessa. For around 2 hours, you have been with us, and you've provided a lot of insights on this therapy. Thank you so much for your time.
I really appreciate all of you. This is probably my favorite presentation I've given. I think it was just awesome to be able to have these really great discussions. So thank you all for your, intelligence and thoughts. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nice having you here. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all so much. Have a good one.
Thank you very much for the time you gave us to talk about all this. It's an unexplored part of the neurological rehabilitation. And I think neurorehabilitation has changed with lots of therapies from different angles. It's not only medicines, it's really the contribution of allied health professionals. We neurologists do very little, apart from diagnosing strokes. It's basically our speech and language physios, occupational therapists, and musical therapists like yourselves, who are very few and far between in the whole world, actually, who will be a huge benefit to our patients, because medicines don't have recovery there's no plasticity medicine as yet, and none coming in the next 20 years that I know of. So I think these are the other restorative and natural healing properties of the brain that we all need to tap into with therapies that are cost effective. They're free most of the time, and they just need to be, brought up the agenda, because most of the time exercise and music is not costed, so nobody sells it. So that's the problem in medicine, that unless there's a company pushing a product, it doesn't get sold. So I'm not sure how we will sell music to our stroke, our Parkinson's, wherever there's a scope for plasticity and for neural degeneration to maintain cognition, including for Alzheimer's disease, including for depression. So it's a huge field out here, but nobody talks about it because there's no profit in all this. So I think that's what needs to change for the sake of people like us who are given our lives for the sake of medicine and for our patients. That's what we need to bring the right bear, with help from very dedicated scientists like you, who are doing a wonderful job in this regard. And thank you very much on behalf of all my patients. Keep the good work going. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a wonderful night. I realize it's so late for you all, so I hope you all get some nice sleep.
No, it was great, Vanessa. Thank you very much for all your efforts. And of course, Dr. Partha for a wonderful summation as usual. Thank you very much. And do you have a video channel, Vanessa, of your own?
Oh, sorry, one more time.
Do you have a video channel where you put, for example, the videos of...
Yes, we have. So MedRhythms has a YouTube channel as well, where we put a lot of like patient videos, and just to kind of get information out there, because we all obviously believe in what we're bringing and want people to know about it. Try to get as many people.
I will put it on our groups also, and of course we'll have a look at that, and then hopefully, as Shailaja was saying, you would deem it fit to maybe look at Indian market also with your research or your So thank you very much.
Yes.
A lot to everyone again.
India, basically, then the NIMHANS, National Institute for Mental Health and Sciences, Professor Hegde, Shantala Hegde is a good contact. Professor Sodhi will pass
Fine.
an
We can take it up. Yeah, sure, Dr. Path.
Internationally. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm closing the meeting now. And thank you, Vanessa.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.